Hello, my friends, and welcome back to this episode of Catholic Single and Flourishing. I'm your host, Chad Etzel, and with me today is a special guest, Dr. Mario Sacasa. Dr. Mario Sacasa is a licensed marriage and family therapist, and he operates a counseling practice in Charlotte, North Carolina. He travels the country, often offering these lectures to dioceses, parishes, seminaries, and college campuses on the themes of marriage, relationships, love, hope, sexuality, and positive psychology. He creates and hosts the Always Hope podcast, which I encourage you all to check out and listen to after this episode, and is aimed at helping you, the listener, grow in emotional and spiritual health. He is the creator of the Catholic Christian dating course called Dating Well, which we're going to dive into a lot today. And he's happily married to his wife, Kristen, and has 4 wonderful sons. Dr. Mario, thank you so much for joining us today.
Chad, it's my pleasure, man. Thanks so much for the invitation. It's going to be great.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's great to have you. And I know that you recently moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. Tell me a little bit about why you moved there and what you really like to do there.
Yeah, so I did my master's degree up in Greensboro, North Carolina, which is about an hour and a half up the road. And when we left Greensboro back in 2007, I think I literally cried halfway from Greensboro to Florida because we were moving back to Florida to be closer to family. And I was like, why are we leaving North Carolina? We didn't want to, when we moved here, this is where we wanted to be. And so it took for the 15 years between '07 to 22 is when we moved back. We tried probably 3 or 4 different times to get back up to the Carolinas. Something about this place has captured my imagination. I've lived in a lot of different places. My heart rests here in a way that it hasn't in other places. And so, 2022, I floated the idea to my employer, Faith in Marriage, and it's about working remotely, and they were supportive of the idea. One of these strange kind of benefits of COVID is that we all kind of got comfortable working remotely and realizing the workflow looks a little different. Not as much needs to actually be happening in the building specifically. So they were open to it and supportive of it. My oldest was graduating high school, and the next one up was kind of getting started with freshman year. So it was kind of at a good point where I felt like we could kind of do this without completely ruining my kids' lives. And so we did it. And we've been back up here for a year, and it's been a wonderful year for us thus far. Still getting settled, making friends and kind of building community here. Obviously, that just takes time. But grateful to be back in this beautiful state of North Carolina. We're close to the mountains, close to the beach, and being able to enjoy a lot of this outdoorsy stuff that we like to do.
That's incredible. And just thinking about that of North Carolina, I don't know a ton of people who live there. I had some cousins live in Virginia and an uncle, and visited them for Thanksgiving. We went down to see, what is it, Kitty Hawk?
Absolutely.
That museum. So I saw a little bit of North Carolina when I was there. So I can claim that I've been to North Carolina.
Yes, you can.
But it seems like it's kind of, I'm from Oregon, so it seems like similar in that sense of, but being on the East Coast where you have access to the mountains and you have access to the beaches.
Yep. That's it. And so, I felt a little bit like Jacob here. It took us 15 years to get Rachel, but we finally got her. And so here we are.
There you go. That's an incredible analogy. Well, and especially for today, for what
yes,
we're
absolutely.
And
absolutely.
First, I just want to hear about your journey as a psychologist, as a therapist, and how you got to where you are, who you typically help, as I mentioned in the intro about marriage and family therapy. Just tell me a little bit of a brief summary of your story to where you've gotten to today.
Yes, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. My undergraduate degree is in psychology. My master's is in marriage and family counseling. My PhD is in counselor education. And kind of my journey, honestly, is I started undergraduate wanting to be a doctor. My dad's an anesthesiologist, and I thought that that's what I wanted to do as well. I wanted to help people, and being able to help people in the medical field was kind of what was the template that was laid before me. And so I thought that that's what I wanted to do. My sophomore year in college, I got to organic chemistry, and like most people know, organic chemistry is a weed out class, and it separates the mice from the men. And I was not one of the men, I'm okay saying that. Like, it weeded me out. It did its job, And 20 something years later, I'm still not bitter about it. I promise. I've talked about it with my therapist and spiritual director. No, I'm joking, because it really forced me to ask questions, as trials often do. It's like, was this really what I want to do? Even up to that point, I wasn't really jiving with biology and the material as much as I thought I should have been. So after that year, between my sophomore and junior year in college, I was kind of just kicking the can of different ideas. I enjoyed writing. So I took like an English class, and my mom was the one actually who was like, "Hey, Mario, you were like that kid in high school that your friends always talk to. I would always see the door closed and people, talking to you, and you're always the one that in the group that everybody would share their problems with. So why don't you just try psychology and see if that's something that you like to do?" And I was like, okay. So I took Psych 101 between my sophomore and junior year that summer, and that was it. It was like fish to water, man. I was like, this is what I was looking for in biology and in the medical sciences that I didn't find, and I absolutely loved it. Loved the theories, loved the material, and so as soon as that class was over, I changed my major to psychology, and I haven't looked back. So three things kind of happened around the same time in college. I found my career in psychology and counseling, I should say specifically, because I'm not a psychologist. Just to be clear about that, there are differences in professional licenses, but most people don't understand that. And that's okay. Um, but I found my career. I found my wife also that same summer is actually when we started dating. And my freshman year in college is when I had my conversion into my faith. So like college was transformative for me. I mean, 4 years where three major life things happened. So even when I transitioned to psychology in getting the degree and then going on and getting my master's degree, I always knew I wanted to kind of integrate my faith into the work appropriately. And so finding these points of connection between what our faith teaches us about the human person, about relationships, about growth, spiritual growth, maturity, coupling all of that with what the science teaches us about how to help people in dire situations, what does the research really teach us about best practices in life and particularly in relationships. So I gravitated towards couples therapy. That's what I've been doing most of my time. And I don't know why. I think around the same time I just started discovering the theology of the body and understanding the church's beautiful teachings related to marriage and sexuality, and that really kind of made sense to me. And I really kind of got on the bandwagon, in terms of like what John Paul II said, which is that the future of humanity passes by way of the family. And so I felt, well, what's the best way that I can support the family? Let's support what the family structure where it starts, which is with marriages. And if we can get marriages right, then we can kind of get the rest of it kind of moving. So that's in a nutshell, kind of what drew me and what has led me to this. And so now this has been, I mean, we're 23 now, so I got my master's in '06. So I don't know, do the math on that. That's how many years I've been practicing as a therapist now.
Right on. Well, we'll let
Yeah.
the audience do that if they
Yeah,
want
yeah.
to do
My
the math.
degree's not in math, right? It's in counseling, so no one hold me to that.
Yes, and that's a great thing. We're grateful to God for that, for your work in counseling, and at least when it comes to that, you're doing a lot of work with married couples. How many years with married couples now that you've been doing work with?
Yeah, so my very first married couple I saw was in 2005, and
Okay,
and that
so
was the very first
however,
couple. Yeah,
we
yeah.
can let the
Yeah,
audience do math on
18 years. I got that one. That one.
that.
That
Okay,
one I did.
all right,
18
very
years.
good.
Yeah,
18 years, and I'm curious, just to set the
yeah.
scene for most of our conversation.
Sure.
What are some of the issues that or challenges, problems, difficulties that you've found to be common trends with married couples that you work with?
Yeah, I think right now the most common phenomenon is just that we're so busy, and so the temptation, and it's so subtle, but the temptation is to not keep our marriage as a priority, or to not continue dating our spouse, and to fall into this pattern where we almost become business associates, and you have your side of the checklist of responsibilities that need to be done in the house, and I have my side of the checklist of responsibilities that need to be done around the house. And all of a sudden, 5 years pass, 10 years pass, 15 years, whatever it is, and you haven't really been checking in as often as you would have liked. And you real all of a sudden it's like they're a different person, or they've drifted and the intimacy is gone, even though we've been living in the same house. And so that right there, I think is the number one thing that I've seen, that is just so subtle, and it's so easy to take each other for granted, to take the relationship for granted, and to forget to do the things that got the relationship going in the first place,
Hmm.
and which is continual pursuit, prayer, commitment, all of those things. Like we still have to do that in marriage. To keep the intimacy alive, to keep the fire alive, so to speak. And it doesn't mean it's obviously going to be fireworks and rainbows all the time, but that there needs to be some commitment and intentionality to the relationship, which means you have to put the kids aside. You have to kind of get all the other stuff done. and making sure that you're having that time that's being focused on one another.
That's a very interesting thing that you mentioned. It can easily tend towards getting busy in life and then becoming
Hmm.
like a business relationship.
Hmm.
And what's interesting, what's just striking me right now, I'm thinking about culturally with rom-coms, Disney and all that,
Hmm.
there's the whole happily ever after concept.
Right.
And I think that's the expectation is marriage, you get married and then it's happily ever after.
Right.
But with a 2 hour movie, you only see 2 hours and then you see the conclusion. You don't see the 15, 20 plus years of the efforts that you need to
Hmm.
put in. So
Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious in that of what do you usually help people with? I guess even from an upstream perspective,
Yeah.
from preventing things to slide into the business relationship, and then maybe even some of the downstream things that you do if it's working with clients, kind of with marriages on hanging by a thread
Yeah.
potentially.
Yeah. So couple things is that, and I haven't checked this research in a little bit, but I'm pretty sure it still holds. This is what I learned soon after grad school, is that there's two time frames when couples are more likely to get divorced, in terms of their marriage span. That 5 to 7 year range, which is the 7 year itch that people talk about and joke about. That's a real thing, and the research supports that you see marital satisfaction drop around 7 8 years. And the reason it drops is because, well, now the pretenses, you've seen it all, and you can only hide the pretenses for so long. And now it's like, all right, I'm really seeing this person as they are, and so do I genuinely recommit myself to them in the fullness of who they are? And so couples who are able to get into that recommitment phase rebound and do very well. Couples who don't, will struggle. So that's one place. The other place that we see divorces happening is 18 to 20, and that's usually when the kids start leaving the house. And so what happens is that this phenomenon that I spoke about earlier, that's when it kind of takes place. It's like, well, now that the kids are gone and that checklist is decreasing, the busyness is starting to decrease because we're getting older and we're not running around to baseball practice, soccer practice, ballet, school, PTO, all the stuff that we're doing, as parents right now. When all that starts to die down, it's like, well, who are we? And what are we doing? And so when we're working with couples in that phase, it certainly requires a little bit of backtracking, and it's kind of like, well, when did things start going wrong? And you're kind of doing like a foundation repair on the house, and so you have to kind of get back to understanding, like, where did things start going and what are the needs, and getting them to be able to start communicating those needs again and pursuing one another again. And so, restarting some of that drive and that desire for intimacy, while also then letting go of resentments that may have been built up, during that time. So that's its own kind of skill set. That's the
Yes.
downstream kind of part of the question. The upstream part of the question is dating well, and that's the reason why I created this program, is because I had seen a number of patterns emerging, both in couples that were dating, single folks that I saw, but then also lessons that I had learned, from all my years of marriage counseling. I said, there's some things that we can do even now while you're dating that begins to prevent some of those patterns from taking root. And so dating well really kind of came out of that space to say, well, what are the foundations that we should try to establish now while we're dating, and that those patterns are going to help us move forward. In seminary formation, I'll just offer this. This is the last thing I'll say here. Is in seminary formation, there's a phrase that goes, "As a seminarian, so the priest." This expectation that, like, if you're seeing stuff while the guy's in the seminary, don't expect that stuff just to magically disappear once he gets ordained. And so similar, we would say with couples, like, as the dating couple, so the married couple, if we can use that kind of analogy. That's like the patterns of engagement, the patterns of communication, the behaviors, the ways that we interact with one another. Those things take root and form a certain foundation while we're dating. And if we can establish healthy patterns that set us up for success, then that foundation absolutely moves itself forward, into married life.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing all that. And that's
Mm-hmm.
that analogy with the seminarians and priestly formation really it it it's I think very illustrative of going applying that to dating and married couples. I think those go well together because the just I think we lose track of that. We think of, hey, I can just flip the switch when I get married and I'm going
Right.
to be that virtuous husband and whatnot. But it really is, and this is a point that I've talked about. I shared a story one time on my podcast about how I heard that from a priest. He was speaking to seminarians. How you live your seminary life is how you're going to live your vocation.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I was hearing that as a missionary very early on. And it's like how you live your mission is how you will live your vocation, how you
Mm-hmm.
will live marriage. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's so important. And one of the reasons that I thought this would be a very valuable conversation to have with you is because on my podcast recently, I released an episode on vision. What does vision of
Yeah.
marriage and family life look like? And this is a good conversation to connect the dots because most of my listeners are people single, people dating, and how do we it's impossible to predict what 3 years out is going to look like or 10 years out is going to look
Right.
like, but we can intentionally put those practices in the here and now to set us up for the long term. So with that, you mentioned dating well, your course.
Can I
Tell
say
us a
one
little bit of.
quick thing just
Oh
before we
yes,
jump to that?
definitely.
So a clear example of this, the of dating into marriage, a clear example actually is cohabitation.
Mm,
The research has been consistent for a very long time that couples who cohabitate have lower marital success rates than couples who don't. Now, there's a lot of reasons why you can say that. Obviously, there's religious questions, values questions, all of that. But if we, in the light of what we're talking about, another way to interpret that data, that information is to say, well, what's the pattern that's being communicated when you're cohabitating? It's a trial. I can get out. This is a stepping stone, and this is the language that we use in our culture as a whole. So if living together is a trial, um, and that's the way you've established your relationship, that's the foundation that you think it can get out. Okay, then when and you're already living together, you're doing everything already that looks like marriage. You're acting like marriage, doing everything that already looks like marriage, except that you have this one kind of lingering sentiment that it can get out whenever you want. If you bring that into marriage when everything still looks more or less the same, except now you're not allowed to get out, it's a real shift that's difficult to happen. And so for the couples who can't make that shift and can't make that transition into really seeing marriage as something different than that, then it becomes rather difficult because the pattern that they've established is that, or the thinking they've established, right, is that this is a trial. And so you bring that into marriage, which is then permanent, and it makes it very difficult
mm.
to make that transition.
Yeah. And I'd like to add in there, especially
Yeah,
from
yeah,
a financial perspective. And I listened to Dave Ramsey's
yeah,
podcast, and
yeah, yeah,
stuff like this comes up. And
yeah.
essentially, he makes the point when you're living with somebody in cohabitation, it's you have a roommate, you don't have a spouse,
That's it.
and it's very easy to start building those habits of,
That's right.
oh, this is my bank account, this is your bank account. So does anything actually substantially change when we get married? Because we
Mm-hmm.
have our own separate lives. We're married singles together. And that really struck me when I heard that for the first time. Just on looking at the finances, it's you just begin building a life together where you're separate,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to marrying together. It's a huge step. There's a huge change in life. But if you're doing everything at once, you're getting married all at once, merging your lives together, it's a new beginning.
That's it.
And also with that, from the Christian perspective, it's a death to self, right?
Right.
But it's you're now one flesh, you're operating together. And that I think goes to what you're saying with a lot of the research that's been done around cohabitation in marriage.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. So it requires a shift of how we look at marriage and view it as something that is, as we've been talking about, permanent. And of course, God elevates this natural kind of good to a sacramental order in our Catholic faith and understanding. So yeah,
Okay.
it's great.
So that also helps set the stage for dating
Hmm.
well, and
Yeah.
what you have here. I know that the course is out there. Tell us a little bit about, one, the need for the course, but also how it came about and how you structured it.
Yeah. So the course is 19 video lessons that take people by the hand from the very beginning of a relationship to the end, and the end can be breaking up or towards engagement. And so really it kind of stops right there at engagement. It's to help people kind of navigate all the complexities of kind of the modern dating scene. And the 19 lessons seems like a lot, but they're short videos. The videos are anywhere between 7 to 17 minutes in length. And so it was never intended to be something where you would sit down and watch a 45-minute lecture. Like I really just kind of want to touch and go, want to keep moving. I know people are busy. I know how people are yeah, our just times is limited. And so using that model, we also have reflection questions at the end of each lesson, and then PDF transcripts if people want to be able to take the the lesson to prayer, or something of that nature. And so the need, where did the need come from? Well, I kind of said it a little bit earlier, which is that I was seeing in some of the relationships that I was working with in counseling, that when I find myself, this is something not normal. When I find myself kind of repeating myself a few different times to dating couples, it's like, oh, this is a pattern. This is a small subset of people. And so usually, like even in counseling as a whole, when I find myself saying a few things, I realize there's a lot of people asking this, and so then I usually do like a podcast episode on it or something like that. And so I said, okay, well, let's kind of create this program. The full story really is that I actually started it by, I wanted to create like just an ebook that we could use as like a lead magnet for our website. And I sat down and started writing some ideas. And like in an afternoon, I had over 10,000 words. I was like, oh, I think I have more to say on this topic than I initially realized. And so then I kind of pivoted and turned it into this video course with some support that we got from a philanthropy group in New Orleans called the Women's Giving Circle. And so that's what allowed us to buy the equipment and to be able to do, all of it on our own. So a little bit of the backstory there, but the need is really, I see the complexity and the challenges that people are facing in dating. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We could talk about that if we want, but I just wanted to kind of bring back some simplicity. I wanted to bring back some guidance, some clear guidance to help people kind of navigate in a framework upon which that they can look at their dating experiences.
Yep. And that's one of the reasons I really wanted to have you on the podcast is certainly you mentioned the need, especially from where you're coming from as a counselor.
Yeah.
But in addition to there's not a lot of content out there. There's a lot of content for high schoolers and college students on chastity, dating, but you kind of miss there's not a lot of content for the young adults until you're engaged or until you're married.
That's right.
And then all of a sudden it's like, hey, great, you're engaged. Now it's time to prepare for marriage. You have 6 months. Good luck. Whereas seminary, you mentioned that before, the seminary and experience is 7 to 10 years maybe. So it sounds like that this is you're getting upstream, being proactive, and using this course to help people in their young adult years and addressing that gap in particular.
That's it. And so, and there's a couple chastity lessons, but I'm light on that because I think others have done a wonderful job kind of really tackling that subject. I wanted to fill in the gap and to bring in, my expertise as a therapist. And so questions like, how do I even know if I'm ready to start dating? What are the things I should be looking for? How do I know if the relationship's going well? All of those are individual lessons. How do we navigate dating apps? How do we navigate long distance relationships if we find ourselves in that? How do I know when it's like, what are red flags? Like, what are legitimate red flags I should be attentive to? When should I know it's time to break up? When should I know it's time for us to move forward? Like even on both phases of like just kind of dating into when is it time to fall into a more serious kind of commitment and stop, the other datings and really kind of buckle down with one person? When is it time to kind of take that step from serious dating to engagement? What are markers that we should be looking at, on that front as well? And so just all of those are lessons, right there. And it's just trying to give some clarity, some guidance to help people say, hey, like you're not alone, and there's some help here. And that's really what I was trying to offer with this program.
Incredible. Well, Dating Well is the title. Tell us a little bit about the title, how you came up with that and what that means.
Yeah. So it's a play on the word, the well, and the word so it's a play on the word. Both as a counselor, health and wellness is important to me. So I love the word wellness. As far as kind of being in a state of wellness. But then I also love the image of a well. I think it's Brant Petrie in his book Jesus the Bridegroom, who speaks about the well biblically is a symbol of spousal love, of courtship. So Moses meets his wife at a well. Jacob meets his wife at a well. We see that wells, and even Jesus in his conversation with the woman at the well had a spousal kind of tone and conversation to it. And so the well is biblically the symbol of a meeting place of where you meet your spouse, and where that happens. And so I wanted to be able to capture that symbol as well. just used the word again. So no pun intended on that one. So I wanted to use that term. We use the symbol also. And so like making sure that we captured, kind of both of this, the idea of dating well, that we are, trying to do this right, do a good job with this, but then also the dating well itself, like the well being this beautiful symbol and image that the Bible has given to us about dating, and about spousal love.
That's incredible because I remember hearing it for the first time. Dating well, it's not like dating excellently,
Yeah.
but I think the biblical imagery certainly makes a lot of sense
Mm-hmm.
in terms of meeting your spouse or having
Mm-hmm.
that sort of background. Do you know by chance why the well? I mean, other than it just being biblical, but why it has that sort of marital imagery? Just on what does Brant Petrie say? Do you remember as like this is why?
I don't know what he says about why. Maybe I forgot about that. It, that's a great question. If I have to like just guess, okay, this is me kind of riffing for a second.
Hmm.
The there's something the well is it's a necessity. In that time we didn't have tap water. We didn't have faucets that we could just kind of open and close. And so the going to the well became a necessity in terms of like this is what we needed to be able to live. And so I think there's something about that I would guess would be this depth that's there. The water, of course, as a something that quenches desire. um, and so the desire that we have for one another, the desire that we have for love, the desire that we have for companionship, that thirst that's present within us, the well is what satisfies that desire in terms of water. This is, Jesus, of course, speaking about that, but the living water, of course, he speaks to the woman
Yes.
is differently. But nevertheless, the well is kind of a place where where desire for thirst is satiated.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so we can apply that then also to marriage and spousal love, and appropriately, that desire for companionship, desire for connection, desire for intimacy. That this also becomes a place where in marriage those things are satiated appropriately and understood. Of course, ultimately through the Lord, who gives us that. So I would say, if I'm guessing, it would be a play on that. That why the well specifically, that it would be a play on that in terms of the notion of thirst and satiation of desire.
That's quite a good. I know we're kind of ad libbing
Yeah,
this,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah,
I appreciate that impromptu meditation there. I
yeah.
was thinking around similar lines here as I
Mm-hmm.
was asking the question, and I know for the ancient Hebrews, it was water had some significance in a number of ways. There's
Yep.
the sea, which in a sense you see there's that death, and
Mm-hmm.
Jesus walking on the water is overcoming death because people would die at sea, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then there's the fresh water, which is from the well or the river, and it's life giving. So I
Yes.
think taking not only just satisfying the desire, the basic needs for ourselves, basic needs for society, but then taking that even further to, I guess, the life giving aspect that it goes beyond just the married couple. There's a symbol there that helps to move them forward, move society forward. And then
Mm-hmm.
on a sacramental level, I think about baptism as well,
Mm-hmm.
where and this is what Jesus is doing in his conversation with the woman at the well, is helping her go beyond just the physical and helping her desire to encounter the Lord, desire the living water.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just a very interesting reflection that we're discussing here.
Yeah, and the well is, there's depth to it, and so you have to water, like you have to dig deep to be able to get
Yes,
the water.
that's right. That's
And
true.
so even the nature of it itself, again, is something that requires this kind of effort. And so again, depth, intimacy, all of that is present there in terms of even in relationships. That if we're going back to the conversation we've been having about patterns that we establish, again, on the first date, you're not going to talk about all your deepest, darkest secrets and revealing everything about, your past sexual history and that's not what you're doing on the first date. So, but as the relationship progresses, and we talk about this in the program, as the relationship progresses, there should be depth that happens as well. There should be times where, as you're growing in trust of this person, you're also growing in intimacy of them. And as you're growing in greater intimacy, you're also growing in greater commitment for them as well. And so, like, you're seeing that depth kind of transpire, which is then, as we said earlier, when marriages fail to do that, or think that the well has run dry, if we want to play with this image, for a little bit, then those are the relationships that start, losing that fire, and start losing
Mm.
that capacity to have intimacy with one another, because they think they have each other figured out, or there's nothing left to dig or to explore. And so there is this beautiful image. I think that's why the well has been used, biblically for this notion of kind of spousal love. It's a great
Wow.
image to play with.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So, getting into a little bit of the content. I mean, my audience in particular, I think most people dating, or people who are experiencing a prolonged time of singleness, or the
Mm-hmm.
perpetually single, as oftentimes I will bring up this
Mm-hmm.
experience of feeling perpetually single. That's really where a lot of my listeners are, I imagine. And I know some of your course material is directed to this group in this way. It's not solely focused on this group who experience perpetual singleness, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious as to what content you could share with our audience that is maybe a preview of your course, or how it might be able to help those who experience perpetual singleness.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say is my heart goes out to everybody who is perpetually single, as you stated. I think that we go back to the question of desire, that if somebody has discerned that celibacy, religious life is not for them, and they're trying to date and trying to find somebody, that's a real cross when it isn't met. I often equate it to a couple that struggles with infertility, that they have this deep desire to have a child, but really through very little fault of their own, they're not capable or not able of being able to do that. And so my heart goes out to anybody, who's in this kind of perpetual, prolonged state of singlehood. Um, so what I would say to that person is, first and foremost, like, to be patient and continue to be patient and continue to just, you have to do your own work. You have to understand what's going on in your own heart. Are there resentments that are starting to form? If there are, like, where are the places that you're losing hope? Like, really making sure that you're attending to any jadedness or cynicism that starts to emerge, and understand why that is, because we don't um, we we know that hope makes us vulnerable, and so we think that jadedness or cynicism is a great defense against it, and to our peril, I would say. you know so we have to make sure that we have kind of a balanced optimism, or a measured hope, so to speak. That doesn't mean doesn't mean that we go into every first date kind of looking, taking all this pressure. And sometimes what ends up happening is that we have this bent up kind of pressure, where it's like, oh, is this the one? Is this the one? Is this the one? We put all this pressure, and because we also hear kind of well-intentioned kind of chastity speakers, say things like, for all of time and eternity, God has created my spouse to be, my one for me, which is beautiful image to have in marriage. But a terrible image to go into a first date with, wondering if for all in time and eternity, is this the person that God has for me? And so we have to kind of let go of maybe some of those pressures and expectations that we're putting on us as we're engaging in this dating space. And so I would say it's a way to start, is to to make sure that you're attending to your own heart, that you're doing the growth that you need to do, but that you're also maintaining lines open, that you are exploring, that you are dating, that you are allowing yourself to be set up by friends who have people that they trust, and that it is going to be a little bit of an exploration, and trusting in God's providence, that He's guiding you throughout this whole experience. The people who have used dating well are folks who are kind of across the board, I would say. I've had singles who are trying to make sure that they're better prepared for dating. I have couples who have done it together, and it's allowed great conversation for the couples to be able to discuss. And I've also had people who have recently gotten out of a bad relationship, or even not a bad relationship, but recently broken up, and it's helped them to be able to understand why the relationship didn't work out as well as they would have liked. So I've been able to get that's the feedback that I've gotten from the students thus far, that they've fallen into those three camps, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that the material has been able to help a wide variety of folks.
Yeah, it sounds like a deep dive into the just dating and
Yeah.
those sorts of topics, and especially internally too,
Yes.
because it's one thing to tell somebody to do something, but another thing to understand on a deeper level where I'm coming from in going out on dates or what have you. If I have a better self awareness, I
Hmm.
understand that depth that I'm going through right now,
Yes.
then it's going to help me understand what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and make different decisions in the future and not repeat similar patterns.
Yeah, and to start paying attention to your own heart. I mean, and paying attention to what your experiences are, and that's going to help you kind of know what you're looking for, and that's going to help you also to have a sense of awareness of, yeah, what is it that I'm really looking for. So there's a lot of self reflection components to the program.
So in terms of the people who have given you feedback on the program, I'm curious as to like what is a if it's a worksheet or a resource that you use that has really hit home with a lot of people, and you've heard a lot of feedback of I really like this exercise, or I really like this question that really stuck with me.
Hmm.
What is that resource or exercise or whatever that you have that sticks out to you?
I, so I think as a whole, I would say I think people have appreciated just the practical nature to it and the easy, kind of ease of use for it. I think that's been something that I've heard. But but something that stands out specifically is kind of this notion of looking at dating as an act of discernment, and 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 recognizing that it's like, okay, if God's called me to married life, then I have to discern this. And once we get into, and that means you have to discern it with a person. It's not just this abstract notion anymore. Like,
Yes.
you can have your checklist and we go through that, but your checklist is always going to have to be filtered through the individual that's in front of you. and
Yes,
and
yes.
and so we have to then, through that individual, massage and say, okay, what are the things that I thought were high priorities, but actually in light of this individual aren't as high as I thought they were. But maybe sometimes you realize, well, in light of this individual, no, these are definitely non-negotiables. And so you got to know what those things are. But the purpose here is that discernment means that we're moving, and that there's intentionality, that God operates within our own heart. God cares about our will. God cares about our desires. God cares about our experiences, and He's trying to reveal Himself, in the context of our lives. And so we're discerning, uh, just even to date, and as we date, and then as dating becomes serious with an individual, now you're no longer just discerning God's will individually; you're discerning God's will together. And so then there's conversations and prayer and discussions that need to be had as you're kind of moving forward, and even that's a pattern. And so part of this is that you start learning how to make decisions together, how to discern together. And if you can do that well with marriage, and then you can do that, throughout the course of your life together. So this notion of dating as an act of discernment, I think, kind of surprises some folks, because they may not really see
Yes.
it that way.
Yes, because that's not really taught in the I go back these movies, right? It's not
Yeah,
it's not
yeah.
taught in that way. The it's it is a lot of work. I mean, that's a cliche thing when it comes to marriage and talking about marriage, but it really is. And this act of discernment, I think about it too. It's one of the more difficult sacraments, if you will, in the church, because I can say, all right, I'm going to go to confession today, or I can go receive the Eucharist and go to mass and whatever. But when it comes to marriage, you can't just one day say, I'm going to go get married today.
Right, right.
And then even if you do end up discerning with somebody, getting married to somebody, every day you're making those sacrifices, you're dying to self
Mhm,
along the way. So that I think it's a helpful connection to help people recognize that yes, it's an active discernment. and
mhm,
and I think not just in the dating process, but during marriage in a different way. You've
mhm,
made your choice, but continuing to say yes proactively
mhm.
and over again, I think is one thing that fits with that conversation on discernment. And I'm oh yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead.
so what's coming to mind right now is a song by Audrey Assad, who I know is publicly, isn't practicing her faith anymore. So certainly just pray for her wherever she is in her life right now. But she has a song called "Ought to Be," and this song has always stuck out with me. There's a line in the song that says, uh, love planted deeply becomes what it ought to be. And she's singing about kind of her own young marriage at the time, and recognizing that we're not the strong oak tree just yet. We're not at that stage in our relationship. But if we do the things that we're doing now, then it will become that. And so I think that's the key here is to recognize that if you are, a young couple that's dating, you're not expected to be married. You're not expected to act like a married couple. So even just that, even just given permission to say that there is something different about dating and marriage, is in our culture revolutionary, because we no longer have distinctions, and we think that all relationships are exactly the same, and that there's no difference anymore in terms of its weight and content outside of what the individuals themselves create the relationship to be. And we would say no, that there is something fundamentally different. And so just encouraging people to say, okay, it's all right. Like when you're just dating, like if you do this right in the context of where you are, then it will grow deeper. Like the depth that we talked about earlier will happen over time. And so just let it play out a little bit, but give yourself space to just be kind of this dating phase.
Okay, wonderful. And thanks for the thoughts there on that. I did want to ask just more of a strategic question.
Sure.
In thinking about the perpetually single type of situation, it's okay, maybe haven't gone on a date in a year, or maybe it's I've gone on 7 dates in 2 or 3 months, and 7 first dates in 2 or 3 months, and it just hasn't, nothing has worked out. What sort of either practical advice or practical strategies could you encourage somebody beyond just like, the inner work, the self-awareness, but specific things would you encourage people to look into as to meeting new people?
Yeah. Well, I was going to say initially prayer, and that's not
Yes,
to,
definitely.
to be praying and to ask, that piece needs to be asked. I have a good friend of mine who got married in his late 30s, and I had him on my podcast, Roy Salgado, and we talked about dating in your 30s, and he had this great phrase. He said there got a point where I was like getting close to 40, and he's like, so I just started aggressive dating. Like he was like, I just dated anybody and everybody. I'd go up to grocery stores. If a girl looked pretty, I'd ask her. I mean, it was just like I was like in it, like he's like, it was a very expensive time of my life because I was spending a lot of money on drinks and dinner. He's like, but I just was in it, and then I realized, like, he's like, I got burnt out. I got burnt out from dating because I was just kind of in this motion, and it became too much. And so a friend of his then finally said, hey, why don't you, consider this girl? She's a friend of ours. And he was like, I don't want, I don't want any of that. He's like, I'm kind of done. And that, lo and behold, she kind of becomes her wife. And so there is a sense of
Just like that. Just like that.
just like that. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it took a little bit, and they have a great story, they share about their first dates and kind of being polite to one another, and all that stuff. So, but he recognized that like he needed to back off a little bit, that he was putting too much pressure on himself and to have this thing kind of figured out. So the introspective piece of it is a practical element also. Okay. So I do want to say that is important, but practically speaking, then, well, where are places? I think this is where we do need to maybe rely on our community, and we need to kind of assess, well, who has the Lord brought before us? Okay. So think about like here's another analogy. Go back to like religious life. We talked about seminaries earlier, but religious life, it used to be where you didn't have like a manual of like 150 religious orders. Like you would just discern kind of the communities that were within your region or within your community. If you had a connection to the priest or the nun, whatever, that helped here, then that's kind of what you did. So there's a place where we can kind of backtrack a little bit. And I know community isn't necessarily tied to geography anymore. Okay. I know that. I know that's where we are. But I would say if you've gone on a number of dates, then again, maybe there's a place and nothing's kind of working. Maybe there's a place where you can kind of at least let your friends know, to say, okay, like, listen, I'm open. And if you have people that are kind of interested, that you think would be good, then let me know. That's a vulnerable statement, and
Hmm.
and what it does is well, you're going to learn a lot about who your friends think you are based on the women that they're going to set you up with.
Yeah,
Yeah, like
it's
it's like, do you really think I was attracted to a girl like that? Like,
well, I think there's something to that of
yeah.
just telling your friends that, hey, I'm open to being
Yes.
set up.
Yes.
And it reminds me a little bit on LinkedIn when you have that circle, you can check the box and it says
Yeah.
open to work.
Yes, exactly. That's
It's just
exactly it.
like,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe Instagram will have that at some point with open to dating, or the
Yeah.
but also I think really peer to peer, like your friends, your
That's the
connections.
point. That's the point.
That's
The
yeah.
people who know you are going to be the people who, yeah, they know you the best. And so,
Hmm.
I think that's a great way to start, is because you have already kind of a little bit of a vetting process there, like
Yes,
this,
that's right.
you can trust this person a little bit more than maybe somebody, just kind of off a dating app. So
Hmm.
I would say that. Um, I'm not opposed to dating apps. I've done stuff for Catholic Match. I know that I've done stuff for the National Catholic Singles Conference, and these kind of large groups as well, where people can come and kind of connect, and that's a great way of being able to meet people. And there's nothing wrong with that either. But when you're meeting somebody for the first time, in that regard, and they're a complete stranger, obviously you just need to have parameters in place and lower expectations, in terms of what you're expecting out of a first date. Certainly, you could be surprised and you can hit it off, and that'd be great, and just allow that to kind of take place. So I would say, um, with friends, start with friends and connections there. Be open to dating apps and those other things as well, but just being, of course, a little cautious with that, at the same time.
Yeah. Well, and I think actually I was on a webinar with Catholic Match, and I was doing Catholic Match Live, and
Hmm.
somebody asked a question about when are you ready for dating, and I had to pause for a second and just say, well, we have to make the distinction between going on dates and actually being in a dating relationship with the
Right.
trajectory towards marriage, because one of the things that I said on that was just being ready for dating and going on dates, that stage is a much lower bar than a dating relationship, and it's more of, are you ready to just build friendships with people, because
Right.
that's the level that you enter into in terms of just that first level of, well, I'm going to grab coffee with somebody,
Right.
and it not make it serious, not going to put pressure on ourselves, but just discern, hey, should I go one more date? Should I go one
Hmm.
more date? And then maybe that turns into a relationship. And I
Hmm.
think that just gets back to that point on a practical level of connecting with somebody new, and
Yes.
whether it works out or whether it doesn't.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So
All right. Well, we're
it's
gonna
hard.
wrap.
I know it's hard.
Yes. Yeah, it's challenging. Well, and I think to that point, before we wrap up here, is
Hmm.
I reflected on this and realized at one point that rejection in dating is actually a very common thing in a normal natural part of the dating process.
Hmm.
More often than not, somebody is going to get rejected, and that's that's okay. That's part of how this is.
Right.
It's
Right.
uncommon for things to work out. So I think that was a very helpful reframe for me personally, because I just
Hmm.
started realizing, okay, if I just see this as a normal natural thing of rejection, it's like, okay, yeah, it might sting to get turned down over a long period of time, but at the same time, that's part of this.
Yep.
And it makes things maybe even better when they do work out.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. That's it. Now, again, the counter to that is always just to not, like, there's, that's why I said, like, a measured optimism.
Mm-hmm.
That's the word I kind of
Yes.
used.
Yeah.
It's like you don't want to go into it expecting rejection. Uh,
Yes. Yeah. That's a
you
good
know,
point. That's a good distinction there.
you don't want to, you don't want to go into, even though the odds are stacked against you. It's not like, you still don't want to be like, well, this is just going to not work out. And it's like, well,
Yeah,
then why
yeah,
are you doing it?
but it's to be in a
But
place where you can be
mhm,
carefree enough to just say,
yes,
hey, if it works out, I'm ecstatic. If it
yeah,
doesn't work out, that's okay.
that's
I
okay
can
too.
continue to take
Yep.
steps forward. It is a step forward in my
Yeah,
life.
that's
Yeah.
it. That's exactly right.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to just ask you a couple of final questions here.
Sure.
Number one, how can our listeners follow your work?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram or social media at Dr. Mario Sacasa. I have posts about all my latest episodes with Always Hope. You can also check us out at faithandmarriage.org, where you can get links to the show as well as links to Dating Well.
Okay, thank you. And we'll put those in the show notes for people to check out.
Thanks, man.
And then final question that I like to close and always ask my guests as I wrap up the show is, I use this term God inspired a lot of time, living the God inspired life. It has a number of different meanings, a number of different intents that I have behind it. but I always like to ask my guests about what that means to them. So, Dr. Mario, what does it mean to you to live a God-inspired life?
Immediately, what came to my mind was this notion of happiness and what is happiness. And we think of happiness as contentment, and that there's an alignment of values in terms of like who I perceive myself to be, and then how I'm actualizing that. And so when there's an alignment of values of who I desire to be and who I am and how I'm becoming more of that person, I would say that that's the happy person. That would be the God inspired person if we want to take it to the next level. If we are blessed enough to have that level of kind of clarity about where we're supposed to be, that takes into account the reality of our circumstances, okay, that takes into account the reality of the conditions and where we find ourselves in time and space, but being able to say, okay, I'm here, but there's a level of congruence, that it's like I'm living the life that I feel that God has placed me to live. And so I would say that would be the God inspired life, is that you have clarity about what that looks like, and then you're actualizing it as well, and moving towards becoming more of that person that you think the Lord has
Incredible.
called you to be.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. The clarity and then the actual moving towards that is just so important, because I think there's so many things going on, so many distractions that we can be swept into, that we don't give it intentional thought to have
Mm-hmm.
clarity in our lives on where we're going.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Dr.
Thanks,
Mario.
Chad. I appreciate the invitation. This was great.